Good evening, good evening. Very happy to see you again. Just last Saturday, we organized an event here, and I've seen some friends who were there with us on the Saturday are also here tonight. Any one of you? I'm sure that many of you deeply care about Hong Kong's housing issues. That's why you show up tonight again. Now, Jeff, why don't you tell everybody about our series? Actually, series named Engagement Evening have been ongoing for over 10 years. Under the scheme, we would invite government officials or electrical members to come to us to talk about a certain topic, to share their insights with the public members, to hear from the general public, so on and so forth. And we just included a talk on the competitive edge of Hong Kong and the logistics industry of the city. But a recent few talks have been devoted to the housing topic. You know, the housing issue and policy are rather complicated, and there are a lot of changes impacting people's livelihood. Now, CDI has been dedicated to public affairs, promoting public interest. We hope to forge bonds in the community involving different individuals and organizations in discussion on certain policies. Hopefully, we can promote some changes. I represent another organizer, Incu-Lab, whose mission is to innovation for change. We mostly incubate startups. Hopefully, those small companies can grow and help to turn their ideas into reality. Why don't we play a game? It's a game to warm up everybody. It's a voting to give you a preview of what will be covered in Ms. Tse's talk. Now we can take our phone to scan this QR code. Scan it. Are you ready? Let's go into question number one. Now, question number one. For the general public or the grassroots citizens of Hong Kong, and the existing public housing arrangement meet the housing demand? Sure, you're highly interested in this topic. 3 potential answers. You think they're a very helpful, very good arrangement, or yes, it is helpful. But it seems that most of you have voted for big improvement needed. Indeed, much remains to be done to address the housing plight and challenges in Hong Kong, and there's been talk on this topic and calling for that for decades. And Ms. Tse will share with us where we have made some progress and where we have not. Coming to the second question. Recent years, we've had many new terms like transition housing or light public housing. You may not be very familiar with the concepts. And SoCO, the organization Ms. Tse represents, has been involved with transition housing projects. And do you think that these policies can help grassroots citizens with their housing needs? And since these are rather new concepts and projects, and Ms. Tse will give more details on these schemes. I think the transition housing has been underway for years. Right. You seem to agree that it can meet certain needs, but not quite enough. And we agree that the Hong Kong government has done a lot. Simply is not enough. Coming to number 3. This is an ongoing topic. The most challenging issue for Hong Kong grassroots citizens' housing policy and arrangement is hard to find land or not willing to use brownfield or it has more to do with the redistribution of resources among citizens, or does it have to do with conflicts in different policies or construction quality and speed, and the list could go on and on. What do you think about? What do you think about this topic? It seems redistribution of resources is what you advocate, like levying higher taxes on the haves and the richer. And BC will share with you her insights on this topic. And now you've got a preview or understanding of what will be discussed tonight. I'm sure many of you working in the social sector are very familiar with Ms. Sze and her organization, primarily in terms of poverty alleviation and housing, etc. Now, without much ado, let's invite Ms. Sze, Lai-shan, to give us her talk tonight. Hello, I'm sure most of you have just finished work. I thank you for coming to this talk tonight. You may know very well about the subdivided flats in Hong Kong. So tonight, the housing topic will lean more towards grassroots housing needs. Actually, it's a challenge or a problem for not just the grassroots but also the middle class. If you're already started your mortgage plan, you're in for a lifelong struggle. For the grassroots citizens, their hope is in public rental housing units, but it takes time to wait for them. And there are different levels of urgency, and some are above the poverty line, some at it, some below it. So we're talking about various needs for housing. Undeniably, I come into contact with many low-quality or undesirable housing conditions. Now, this is called loft, built on top of the kitchen or cubicle, partitioned rooms, accommodating a family of 5 or 6. Now, this is a coffin apartment. Now, on the bottom right is caged home. Actually, all these can be categorized as cage home, not just those fenced with wires. Actually, has there been any improvement in the public housing? Actually, for a time when Chief Executive Tung Chee-hwa at building 85,000 public rental housing units, and the situation has improved somewhat, and the number of subdivided flats has dropped. But during the next CE, Donald Tsang's term, a lot of people had to resort to subdivided units. So the number has crept back up. But in recent years, the number has been increasing by the year. According to government statistics, their statistics are very interesting. Partitioned homes refer to only those with a kitchen right at the entrance. There are 100,000 such units, but for the report done by the Long-Term Housing Strategy Committee in 2023, there were close to 130,000 such units. And there's a report done by the Task Force for the Study on Tenancy Control of Subdivided Units. According to the report, there were over 111,000 such subdivided units, and the survey was very detailed. Now, subdivided flat is a rather new term, but it is actually different flat divided into being from within a single apartment. A monthly rent starts mostly from 4,800 or 500, and if you have to pay a monthly rent of 2,800 or $3,000, you could be expecting only partition homes. And partition homes usually have shared kitchen and bathroom. And you've seen cockloft. Space capture is something we've only seen in recent years. Plastic partition is more solid. And it has less fleas, but there are flea problems too. And there are rooftop flats subject to the highest temperature. Now, most of them are not concentrated in Sham Shui Po, but in the Yau Chim Mong district. So, most of these flats are situated in Kowloon, followed by the new territories, where the number of such flats have been increasing over the past decade or so, followed by the Hong Kong Island. Have all those tenants applied for PRH units? According to our researchers, only 50 to 60% have started applying for public rental housing units. Do you know why? A few percentage. Actually, new arrivals, not yet permanent residents, so they have not applied for PRH units. But a lot of them are actually not aware of their rights. Or some are in the process of divorce of missing certain documents that disqualify them from applying for PRH units, accounting for about 50% of such non-applicants. And there were 10% of subdivided tenants, or 12% of them, exceeding either income limits or past limit. We're talking mostly about singletons. On the Hong Kong Island side, I've known some elderly residents still working as janitors or security guards. If they work for 12 hours a day, they have a monthly income of 14,000, exceeding the $12,000 limit. So I've seen some residents living in partition homes for 2 decades. They're about there for life, actually. And not all applicants for PRH used to buy in subdivided flats. Many of them actually move out. They want a flat of their own. And there are different categories of such PRH applicants, but subdivided flats tenants more and more often, around 200,000 of them are applying for PRH units, even though the number has dropped. It remains relatively high. When we think about the housing problem, let's not limit our thinking to housing. There are many reasons to such living conditions. For example, they may not be able to afford housing, or the housing policy is preventing them from living in a better housing condition. Or they're waiting too long to move into subsidized housing. And many residents in the bad quality cage homes or partitioned home had a very low self-esteem. They feel inferior to others. Or we've got kids looked down upon at school simply because they live in subdivided flats. And they could feel very embarrassed. They could even not do some certain assignment with their classmates at their home. So they got laughed at, they got despised, they got made fun of. And recently, more attention has been given to such issues in the past. People would simply say the residents are simply not working hard enough or studying well enough, and some visitors would warn their kids, if you don't study well, and you will end up in one of those flats once you become an adult. But actually, those subdivided flat residents each have their own struggles. They lack access to education. And now you can see these subdivided flats, the living conditions can be very restrictive, and it's not very, you can't visit them very readily. But for those living in cage homes or partition homes, they will leave their doors wide open, and since many facilities are shared anyway, all caged homes are those numbering 12 spaces, 12 bed spaces within a single apartment. For example, this room we're living in is a single apartment, and it is divided into 12 bed spaces. And for every 8 individuals, there has to be one toilet. There is no rule governing the size of bed and the number of tenants allowed in a single apartment. So you can actually cram 30 people into such space. Many single people in their 40s, 50s, or even 60s are living in such divided flats. Very few of them are actually in their 20s or something. And other residents are those with family and children. Other tenants are those with mental illness whom their family don't want to live with. Other residents include ex-offenders or homelessness, the homeless people looking for cheaper rents compared to other housing options. What about the size of such a subdivided flat? For a single bed space is longer, slightly longer than this table, slightly wider. It's usually 3 feet times 6 feet for a partition home, and it occupies a total space of 30 to 40 square feet. You can witness a variety of conditions, but all in all, there is more, only 1 to 2 square meters for a single individual. And not to mention you have to use toilet and other facilities. Some bed spaces even don't come with a kitchen. They always come with surprises like fleas that would keep you from sleeping. In some of those homes, you can see those fleas, jumping here and there. I advise the social workers or volunteers to take precaution against such insects. So sleeping can be a problem for such tenants plagued by fleas. And another problem for children, they don't have a desk to write their homework at, so they have to do their schoolwork or housework or homework in their space, affecting their bone health, particularly their spine. And that could affect the brain development of the children. That there are elderly residents. Most of these elderly residents will have climbed a few stairs to reach their apartment in tenement buildings. Then they get into conflict or fights over the use of toilets, or etc. Many elderly residents actually resist that. They hate sharing their facilities with other neighbors, resulting in injuries or even fatalities because of conflicts. Because the elderly patients have their elderly people have their own physical or mental struggles. So that's really, they are conflict prone. Another challenge is the temperatures, the heat. They simply can't fall asleep. They have to keep waking up to take a shower, or they have to spend most of their daytime at malls. But the elderly residents cannot keep walking in a shopping mall without a proper chair to sit on, so they have to go back home. And this can be really bad for your children who can't sleep. And this is the typical setting of a bathroom, giving rise to sanitation problem. Of course, one of the gravest challenges is the high monthly rent. A monthly rent of 2,300 was the rate over 10 years ago. At the median rate now is about 4,000 to 5,000. And fires could break out in such living conditions. There have been incidents in recent months because of short-circuit issues and reckless use of fire. Such buildings collapse, possibly because these buildings are simply too old and dilapidated, and they couldn't stand the weight of the many subdivided flats in the higher levels. Actually, in one such building, there were only 24 apartments according to the original design, but the apartments were further divided into a total of 100 subdivided units, and some homeowners would even tear down the weight-bearing wall, jeopardizing the structural integrity of the building. And some homeowners would block up the fire escape, and so people cannot escape from a fire. So there is even a risk of collapse of buildings. These are fire hazards, and I won't talk about those complaints of the residents in details. These are some of the open bed spaces. Usually, bed spaces cost more than $1,000 per month. The starting level would be 2,000. For space capsule, the starting rent is 2,800. In the past, it cost even 3,500. During the height of the pandemic, it dipped to 2,500 because people simply can't pay that sum of money to live in just such small space. Now you can see different kinds of bed spaces. There are up level and lower level. And some apartments are partitioned with the steel or iron partition, because wires simply doesn't provide any privacy at all. And they would refrain from using iron cage homes because it's been internationally notorious, capturing the attention of international journalists, and they don't want to use wooden partition to avoid fleas. So iron partition is what they've been using. This is a space capsule. It looks modern, but the housing condition is deplorable. Okay, subdivided flat. Some of them comes with a toilet, but some toilets are situated right at the entrance. You have to walk across it to reach your bed, cubicle, and partitioned by wooden panels. The question, why do people live in inadequate housing or subdivided flats? One major reason is long waiting time for public rental housing units. Another reason is most of the residents are single people. It's only after 1985 where singletons are allowed to apply for rental housing, but the cost is a long waiting time. So we didn't have any singleton applicant actually moving into a PRH unit until 1996, and the government says the government thought that awarding PRH resources to singletons are simply not economical, not cost-effective. They discourage single applicants to apply for PRH units, and they also apply a limit of age. So if you're single in your 18s or in your 20s or early 30s, expect to move in only in your 60s. When these single applicants cannot move into a PRH unit, you have to live in put up with a subdivided flat. And another kind of resident is the new arrivals. Even though the criteria have been loosened a bit, but many of them still have to meet the public residency requirement to be qualified for PRH unit. And another reason is a very small percentage of land can be used for housing. Only around 24% of land was developed and around 7% for residential. So there have been cries for a shortage of housing land. The effort only picked up in recent years. Poverty is obviously a reason. The minimum wage has not existed, and if we actually the minimum wage is only 30 to 40% of the city's median wage. That's much lower than other economies or countries. And some applicants for CSSA, and the rent subsidies is only slightly above 2,000. What you can do with this $2,000 per month, so you can only move in the cubicles or subdivided flats. You can't expect better housing than that. So, other subdivided flat residents may have got their access to PRH unit, but it's very remote, but they can't relocate their work. They have to live close to where they work. Basically, subdivided flats are their only choice for those who can't afford better housing, especially for the elderly people who don't want to move outside their familiar neighborhood. It's very hard for them to move to somewhere else. In some of our Wan Chai visits, if you don't have a place on the Hong Kong island to house them, to accommodate them, they would rather stay put. They are not well educated, they don't have sufficient resources, so moving out of their familiar neighborhood will strike fear in their heart. So we need to think about how to serve these kinds of people. Even though we have rental subsidies, for example, the amount awarded to CSSA applicants, actually over half of them cannot use that sum to pay for private housing rental. You pay for a housing rent of $3,000 or $4,000. That means you have roughly only around $1,000 per month for your dining. So the rental subsidies are simply not enough. The government has said there are 220 households waiting for a public rental housing unit for an average of 5.7 years, involving over 40,000 people. And that 5.7 years applies to the general applications. Over 100,000 of them are those general households and elderly applicants. 5.7 years applies to these two kinds of applicants. And 10,000 new arrivals or 90,000 singletons inevitably have to wait for much longer than 4.7 years for a public rental housing unit. Now, inadequate land resources and housing supply, and the government relies on land sales revenue. As long as they sustain this land revenue policy, we rely on land transaction for tax revenue. You can't expect our property prices to drop much further. And such policies give rise to a host of conflicts, mostly as a result of opposition by property developers. So the 85,000 unit policy championed by Tong Chi-Hua was hotly resisted by property developers. And it was only later abolished by Donald Tsang. When that policy was abolished, and some public rental housing unit, during that time, some subsidized housing units actually have better conditions, but that's no longer the case. So how can the government actually solve housing problems?
你花時個收入呢個
It mostly has to do with the public rental housing. If you pass the mean test, satisfying the income and asset limits, you can apply for PRH unit. But the problem is inadequate supply of such a unit. Many have to wait indefinitely, and there are restrictions applied. And some will see their quota frozen, and some others disqualified. Even now, you're qualified, and unless you're an elderly applicant, you cannot choose the location. So, another thing is, the CSSA rental subsidies are simply not enough. So these would be applicants or would be PRH residents have to wait living in subdivided flats. And of course, everybody knows we have long had the shortage of public housing, and even the government says that they have identified land able to build 300,000 units on, but not all of them are ready for development. Some have to go through certain urban planning procedures or even lawsuits like the Gulf land in Fun Leng. You don't know how many more years will the court cases last. And actually, are all those pieces of land able to translate into housing? That's big question mark. The government has introduced, the government used to introduce some legal protection. In 1998, rent control was revoked. It was only restored in 2022. But even then, it doesn't limit the rent, the starting rent. And 2004, protection on the security of tenure was cancelled, and it was resumed in 2022. So you can imagine property owners really are making good money between 2004 and 2022, because the demand was very keen and they can raise their rents as they please. But even now, with certain legal protections, the protection or the enforcement is very weak. We have 120 subdivided units. Only 20,000 units have seen their paper filed to the government. So the government has to think of ways to regulate the rest. And many homeowners still refuse to make their power and water bills transparent. They're overcharging their tenants. So even though there are laws and ordinances, they cannot be properly enforced. And our tenants do not dare to report property owners' abuses for fear of being ejected or evicted. And another reason is the cumbersome procedures that might even cost their work. They don't simply have time to go through these procedures. And there are suggestions about anonymous report. This is an idea worth considering. The government, as far as we can see, it is actively looking into viable protection for the tenant. Best space apartment ordinances does not have any teeth at all. Licensed and licensed cage homes look basically the same. So the governance or such regulation have not really taken effect. There were many illegal cage homes. If I get into trouble with this one, I close it down and open up another one elsewhere. Oftentimes, thanks to the cooperation and support by their tenants. And now the tenants simply do not have any choice but have to move along with their property owners. If you have sufficient housing project to accommodate those tenants, and they wouldn't cooperate with the landowner, property owners. In recent years, there has been a project of transition housing. It was announced in 2018. And construction didn't start until 2020. And in Lai-shan, the one for experiment on land provided by Henderson Land was only ready for living in 2021, and another one only ready in 2022. So in 2022, the government says it has identified land able to support the construction of over almost 22,000 units. We were in talks with C.Y. Lau, the chief executive then, who promised to build public rental housing units as long as there is land. But most of those land plots were not appropriate for construction. Very small sizes. You can see in Yinghua Street, and those transitional housing only contains 140 units, another one in Chinwan, 220 units, 103 units in the current one in Taiwan, and between them, over 20,000 such transition housing units are provided, structured, and other projects are underway. And 10% of applicants have waited for PRH units for over 3 years. And it is actually open to all kinds of applicants, be it an elderly or young or new arrivals. But the problem is the duration of the leases. Some land pieces are owned by the government, others, like the second phase in Lamphol, is owned by Henderson Land. Now, property developers are very active in supporting the government's initiative, and none of them have the courage to protest against the government policy, so they have to contribute their own land resources, usually for an effective period of 7 years. For that Lai-shan project, because the land has been loaned for 4 years, but the project was not ready for 4 years, so they only lived in there for 2 years. Those residents have to move out. Now, giving everyone a wrong impression that the transition housing can only meet your needs for 2 years. For government, if it's a temporary leases, it doesn't have to go through urban planning procedures, so the whole procedure was speed up. For the project in Changsha-wan, it will expire in March next year. Now, there is policy of automatic renewal for every 3 months until further notice. And this is a compromise the government has made to lengthen the lease duration. If applicants for PRH unit for over 3 years are not interested in such transition housing, they will simply cede the quota to those waiting for less than 3 years. And some elderly residents were not qualified when they were young, or they didn't choose PRH when they were young, and now they are disqualified. The Development Bureau has identified some idle buildings, government-owned properties that have been idle, so they can do some renovation of it and use them for housing. And then there's the Urban Renewal Authority. I came from Taiwan. We are running a project of 50 unit project. It is a transition housing project. So these 20-something thousand units come from various sources. They also include partnership with private property owners. As far as we knew, the housing department was not very enthusiastic about building such projects. So eventually, it was an NGO having to step in. And the chief executive, Carrie Lam, and other government officials appealed to us to participate in this scheme, because without anyone supporting it, the scheme would not take off. The government is subsidizing such NGOs, and who will then go to find architects and construction companies to build the project. And the housing department will provide some expertise. And for us, a lot of architects and other partners have stepped up to help us voluntarily, and many of our colleagues have to learn about construction from the scratch. We have put in a lot of overtime work. Such projects are not completed yet. There will be light public housing future. And other initiatives by the government are home modification program, so far supporting over 20,000 units. And then there are have-known subsidies. The principle is, public rental housing rents are waived by the by the financial secretary, and these have-known subsidies will also be extended to subdivided tenants, but they should actually roll out the subsidies ongoing on a regular basis. Another initiative is cash allowance trail scheme, ranging from $1,000 to $3,000 per month, benefiting certain families, up to 20,000 such households. Again, this is not a regular policy. After expiry in the third year, it has been renewed for another year, but what about in future? It's a big unknown. Now, people might ask, with the light public housing, is transitional housing still needed? For transitional housing, the government will subsidize the construction cost, and the operators will hire janitors, security guards, social workers themselves. They will be responsible for the NGO will be responsible for maintenance and insurance expenses, and even demolishing will have to be paid for by the NGO. Because really at the beginning we haven't even thought about the major repair issue. We have negotiated with the government. We said we don't have that human resources and energy or expertise to do it. We can provide basic services. As for repair, maintenance, and property management, it should be provided by the government. And our new CE, the current CE, John Lee, is very enthusiastic and wanted to do something at the behest of the central government. So he backs the light public housing project, exempting NGOs like us from taking up the full responsibility before the project. So from the beginning to the end, light public housing is done by the government. And NGO's involvement is minimal. And for transition housing project, the rents are higher because it is financially independent project without subsidies. The government says the NGO can charge up to 30%, or usually 25% of the rent that was not entitled to CSSA. Now, light public housing comes with a monthly rent of only 90% of PR and average PRH level. And light public housing and transition housing projects with good quality, adopting the MIC approach. The only drawback is it cannot exceed a 40-story high. Otherwise, the technique or technology is very sophisticated. The first project uses cement, and another project uses steel, which will thicken the wall and shrink the actual livable space. Light public housing adopts the same pattern. It comes with the basic amenities and a new renovation. Because for PRH residents, they don't have the means to renovate their unit. So renovation was not provided in the precision housing, and now is available in the light public housing project. The shortage or the weaknesses, limited geographic choice, mostly in Yuen Long, but it has a very long duration of at least 5 years. And even on some land, and people can live there until they move in the PRH unit. A suitable plot is in Kai Tak. There used to be very fierce complaints, and now people have known better than to complain.
好，咁另一個新嘅政策啦，啱啱知即係舊年年尾先公布嘅就係嗰個劣質劏房啦。
policy announced last year. It's about eliminating low-quality subsidized flats. It's a good step, albeit not an easy step. It could take some time to finally eliminate all subsidized units. But at least it's a good idea, it's a good promise, it's a good gesture. by the government. It all comes down to the definition, the legislation scope, enforcement, and accommodation policies. If the impact is very minor, it's well, this policy will not benefit much. If there are laws, can they be enforced? What if the property owners or the residents simply shut the door? There has to be an accommodation policy. We've done a survey. 90% are warm to the idea, but they need accommodation policy. So, without accommodation policy, the tenants and the residents will not be enthusiastic in reporting low-quality subdivided units for fear of losing their living space. Like many residents living in the industrial building, if you stumble upon them and find out that they're living in undesirable housing, they will simply deny they're living there. I went to one, and without any context there, people will refuse to tell the truth. But when you know someone living there intimately, or you know them well, and other residents will also speak up. And the United Nations has the definition of adequate housing, it has to meet 7 criteria: the stability of habitation, basic facilities, affordability, appropriateness of the housing, is it accessible to to people with different kinds of needs, and locations. And then 7, it has to include, it has to be non-discriminatory. If per capita living space is lower than 5.5 square meters, that is not acceptable. They have to be re-accommodated. And for public rental housing unit project aim for singleton, the minimum living space has reached 13 square meters. We have given government a range of suggestions listing something that we cannot accept. If it's for the per capita living space cannot be less than 7 square meters for a household of 2 people or more. Per capita living space cannot be 5.5 square meters. And same principle applies to households of more people. But how do you do the calculation? We simply set the number of residents acceptable in a certain living space. Some flats are subdivided vertically, and there has to be at least 2 meters in a vertical space accommodating a regular movement. And we have recommended the maximum number of subdivided units, 5, and the materials cannot be flammable. There has to be ventilation, proper sanitary kitchen and toilet facilities, and subdivided flats have to meet certain safety features, and rent levels need to be regulated, and the property needs to be properly managed. So have listed 9 criteria. Failing 3 of them, a subdivided flat will be considered low quality, and they have to be eliminated. But usually, even such even criteria are so lax, many subdivided flats fail 3 or more of them. Actually, 30% of subdivided units failed at least 3 criteria. Our ideal is, of course, there are no subdivided flats in Hong Kong. For subdivided unit with toilet, they cannot be subdivided. They cannot accommodate more toilets because people living beneath that floor will have a water leakage issue, or even jeopardizing their structural integrity. A closely associating problem with the housing challenge is poverty, a problem. According to an NGO's study, up to 2023, there are 1.3 million people living in poverty. If the economy is improving and fewer people will fall beneath the poverty line. And paints a pretty similar picture to what we understand from the subdivided flat topic. It paints a very similar picture, and most of these poor people live in quintal, elderly, and children or youngsters below 18% are the largest group of the poor people. And some government says that the elderly residents simply have they have a lot of assets. They simply don't have enough income. So the poor population among the elderly group can be inflated. There is the category of working group, earning very meager income, made worse if they have children. And there is a category of new arrivals. They could struggle in the beginning years, but they'll eventually move out of poverty. On average, among ethnic minorities, there are 20% of them who are considered poor, but the percentage is particularly high for Pakistani ethnicity. Now, these statistics, NGOs and other organizations know how to provide better care to the poor people. Do you have any questions for me so far? Any policy recommendations to alleviate poverty? We believe the government needs to keep a reserve of land resources, because one generation after another will live in Hong Kong. They will need a proper place to live in. If we want our city to keep developing economically, there will only be an increasing demand for housing. If those people who are able to buy private housing units, say, if you spend $10 million, it can only afford a flat of limited space. So this is quite inhumane. You have to keep a stable pool of buildable land to ensure sufficient housing supply. Otherwise, the housing prices will stay at a very elevated level. The government also needs to take proactive and innovative measures to increase housing provision. For example, through longer tenancy, use of tenancy in transitional and social housing, light public housing, etc. And some people may be willing to move to further neighborhoods, be it Yuen Long or Tuen Mun, if they cannot put up with their existing conditions anymore. But their concern is if I move into a transition or light public housing unit in Yuen Long or Tuen Mun, when I get my chance at PRH unit, can I stay in the same district? You don't relocate me to another neighborhood because I'm settled in the community, with school, with everything. So the government need to be accommodative to such aspirations of residents. The government has expressed its willingness to accommodate, say, if there are appropriate projects nearby, they will prioritize relocating these temporary residents into a PRH project in the same district. Due to the commuting challenges, people tend to live closer to where they've been living. And the government has introduced some subsidies for those are willing to move to further districts, but the government needs to take care of their job and educational support, job and educational needs as well when they have to move to a further neighborhood. And another measure is temporary relaxation of allowing distributing to provide decent and safe subdivided flat for the needy, setting a certain duration. Another initiative is initial rent control. It needs to be properly sent in case it climbs to too high a level, and rent subsidies, security of tenure, subsidy for water and electricity fee, and need to be considered as well. Oh, I've missed a point in precise poverty alleviation. Subdivided flats. The government is aiming at 3 major areas to alleviate poverty, and 1/3 of it would go to subdivided flats, a community living room, and custodial bystanders are some of the initiatives rolled out in 2024. And some measures can help the residents up to a point, for example, and these residents can cook their dinner or meet their friends in a community or a neighborhood and living room. They have failed to cover all 18 districts. So the government is rather relying on donation from the private sector. Some companies will donate space, paying for the renovation too. We do believe the government has to do more to combat poverty, rolling out more policies and redistribute financial resources more properly. For example, poverty alleviation and expenditure, or the public expenditure has to account for 25% or more of GDP. And accordingly, a progressive tax system needs to be introduced. This is what the government needs to consider. Education is not a key area. Many children living in poor families cannot afford a good education. Even though primary school or even secondary education have been provided for free, but extracurricular activities cost money too. Grassroots families can hardly afford such activities to help their kids to learn better. Another area where the government can support the poor is in employment. For example, increasing employability of the public members. Attention should also be paid to medical and healthcare issues, like increasing resources for public healthcare and medical services, rolling out health voucher, etc. And gender equality, care for children, care for the elderly, and tax reform are many of other topics the government should seriously consider. And how can all of us can participate in helping out the poor? So if you are blessed to be a good, you're blessed to be a landlord, be kind. Be a kind landlord. Be kind to your tenants. Do not charge them exorbitant rent. Another thing you can do is to cooperate with the NGO to provide decent housing. You can be a volunteer to help in building or manage transitional housing. You can support the NGO in their advocacy work. You can also apply to be a voluntary teacher and trainer to help parents take care of their children. You can participate in some one-off visit, and you can deliver donation items to them, and there are a host of other activities you can opt for. Now, a brief introduction about SoCO. SoCO was founded in 1971. It is a pressure group found under the ecumenical movement of Catholic and Christian churches. Many people from the church community wanted to donate some resources and goods to the poor, but they later realized it eventually had to do with policy improvement. So those church communities come together to form such a group, and the group campaigns for a fair and just social system. So our emphasis is on identifying challenges in the community and to find out those marginalized and forgotten group in the community. We would raise our voices to the government. We'll get into contact with residents. We hope to empower residents and to speak on their own behalf. Why do we do that? Because our mission is, and our vision is, everyone should enjoy equal human rights. We hope that our changes can help benefit everyone. We serve a wide range of targets. Actually, on the housing topic itself, it covers elderly supported women, etc. And we have also some initiatives helping those homeless. Our outreach work each year reaches over 10,000 households and around 120,000 households with around 250,000 people living in inadequate housing at urban slums. Some of our targets. We undertake community learning center, home modification project, and we organize some tours. And if tours are not sufficient, we can put up some photo shows. We train some homeless people and residents in subdivided units to be tour guides and paying them in return so as to create jobs for them in a sense. Transitional housing. It was started in 2015. First project was Happiness X Home. I work with different organizations to provide housing for the homeless, for different kinds of people. Our projects span extensively in Kowloon, on the Hong Kong Island, in Taiwan, near Victoria House, and we've got several projects owned by private developers in some other projects, and a landowner is willing to acquire the units where there have been unfortunate incidents, and they would lease out the units at a very affordable rate. So our projects span the entire territory, helping some 1,000 households. Now, this is a project on the Yinghua Street. We carefully selected the color to make sure it looks cheerful, and we regulate the size of the windows. Now, this is West Kowloon Magistrate. We inherit their exterior wall. There are two power blocks here, and a water supplies department did not allow us to build a single block to avoid some pipeline issue. And former CE Carrie Lam came to preside over the opening ceremony. Now, these are the home modification program initiatives we've done for community learning center. You can see our pictures. Now you can scan the codes and donate to our organization. This is pretty much my introduction. The first question will be from me. There have been talks about changes, demographic changes in Hong Kong. And they say the population is growing less rapidly than before. Does that mean that the housing challenge will be not so acute? If you look at the inflow and outflow, you see hundreds of thousands leaving Hong Kong, but on the other hand, the city has been importing many people from the mainland under different initiatives like the investor scheme and talent scheme and high quality talent scheme, and there are overseas students. There are different sources of people coming into Hong Kong. And migrant workers form another group of new arrivals. When such schemes were opened, the city mostly drew in mainland residents. and tourist number has declined. And before 2023, before the pandemic, there were 10 million people, 10 million tourists came to Hong Kong. And 50 or 60 million tourists from the mainland would travel to Hong Kong before the pandemic. Now the tourist number has shrunk rapidly. You may feel the city is more spacious, more comfortable walking, but that means the economy is in a worse shape. Consumption has been hit, and people are flocking to Shenzhen for consumption. A large group of people have moved to Canada, the US, and the UK. So I'm sure many of you are very interested in policy issues, so feel free to speak up and ask questions. Now, I'll throw in the second question. Maybe the new arrivals will plug the gap left by the emigrating people. If we talk about single permit applicants for family reunion in Hong Kong, the number has declined. That number was particularly low during the pandemic years because the central government has closed the door. Normally, on average, 150 applicants per day would join the scheme. Over the past 10 to 20 years, the daily average was 120. The quota were very detailed. When I joined the SoCO in 1995, each family would give birth to 3 to 4 children, but now that birth rate has declined sharply, some even without any children. And some mainland families simply give birth to their kids in Hong Kong. So the children are taking up less of the daily quota. And so the 150 daily quota are not very well utilized. And there has been change in attitude in mainland residents towards Hong Kong. They don't think Hong Kong is attractive anymore. And some are not willing to relocate to Hong Kong so that they have to start their career from the scratch. And cross-border family reunion, cross-border marriages have taken on a new feature, and up to 20 to 30% of Hong Kong women will go to the mainland to live there, to live with their mainland husband. And fewer Hong Kong men marry mainland women. Some would get married in Vietnam or other Southeast Asian countries. So there will be a fixed group of people under the category of cross-border marriage. Certainly. And there's another group of people who were born in Hong Kong, whose parents were mainland residents. There are over 200,000 such people. You don't know when this group of people will come to Hong Kong. Why doesn't the government do a good registry of such people? 60% of such people are well educated. The rest are poor. So there are hundreds of such applicants each year. And there were many of them coming to Hong Kong to live here temporarily. And there are overseas students coming to Hong Kong, people from various talent schemes, over 100,000 of them. But actually much more than a single permit applicant who bears the most blame from different grievances in the society. Anything you want to share? Ms. Sze. Now, you've spent most of the time talking about housing supply. But conversely, we'd actually need to reduce demand. Our demand has to do with applicants, the number of applicants. And the other day, Mr. Fung King Kee talk about adopting a Singaporean model, and it's divided units, some kind of irregular housing. And in the old days of Hong Kong, people are less demanding when it comes to housing. There were many living in squatter or any some resettlement areas. So some people can lower their housing expectation, while why doesn't the government, the biggest landlord, and owning those subdivided flats and rent to those tenants? Now subdivided units are scattered across all kinds of buildings, scattered across the city. Why does the government grandfather all these housing projects, giving the government a short period of time to remodel those housing until they meet a certain living conditions or basic safety requirements? Then there won't be a problem of the tenants refusing to open the doors to inspection. If the government are willing to grandfather such irregular housing projects, and I believe the government will be charging very reasonable rent, the government can give one chance to those undesirable or reckless homeowners. And otherwise, I will acquire property and grandfather your housing project. I'm sure there have been talks like this, and the government can do a comprehensive study of how many irregular housing projects there are in Hong Kong. When all of them are identified, the government grandfather them. The cost involved would actually be very similar to different schemes, subsidizing schemes nowadays. I'm not sure whether the civil service have been working on this front, but we have every right to raise questions to civil servants. If demand can be frozen, then the government will have the initiative. So grandfathering such projects subject to certain conditions could be a way out. The government will have the upper hand in undertaking such projects. There are so many geniuses in the government. Why can't the government come up with such ideas? If the public housing adopts a Singaporean model, and a lot of applicants will opt for a different housing scheme, diverting the PRH applicants. Fung King Kee said such idea was raised to the government back in the 1990s. I'd like to hear from your perspective. You have been dealing with the government for so many years. Why don't they come up with such ideas? Your government is really by the book. Why does the government grandfather such housing projects? Yeah, the government is reluctant. That's my question too. Mine is a response to. I've got some comments on the distributing about the property rights. Are they scattered? We talk about in industry the industrialization 3.0. So if the distributing falls under uniform property right, and it will be an easy switch. Otherwise, certain distributing units are converted to housing purposes, but neighboring units are still being used for other hazardous purposes, and that could be very serious safety issues. So in-distributing should really not be the way out, because when the property rights are scattered, only specific homeowners use their units for residential purposes. The overall housing project may be very undesirable. I've heard some suggestions from you. And you've listed out some ideas to encourage tenants to do some blowing. But the concern is, if I get complaints all the time, if my abuses get reported, then I'll simply lack the motivation in providing such housing. So, I think the accommodation policy is a key. If those abusive landlords are punished, and their tenants will also get into trouble, losing their living space. Well, now, about your distributing issues, the government is not willing to introduce some rent waiver, but it is open to reindustrialization or renovation of distributings. And they have done some projects converting an entire distributing block into a residential housing. The government has given us money to remodel it, but the property owner was not well off, and they charged me very high rent. And there is a chance to hike the rent after 2 years' time. So we failed to come into agreement, and so we refused to proceed with that project. Recently, we have come into agreement in the Yau Tong because that property owner was a charitable soul charging only a nominal rent of $1 per month. So that project is a sort of government project. And we want the government to adopt a proposal, but the thing is, the government does not tolerate anything bordering on illegal. Our idea is the government, why don't you award the industrial site to the property owners at a more favorable rate? So at the end of the day, the government needs to be willing to roll out the land at a favorable rate. But the government would never review to us why they are not willing to do that. I think this falls into a gray area. My point just now is reindustrialization 3.0. We do need the development of industries. Because without industry, there won't be job opportunities. And as you have said, the service sectors and tourism sectors have taken a hit in recent years. So, when it comes to using and distributing for residential purposes, we need to strike a fine balance between the housing problem and the economic problem. If you are able to house the people, but the people will lose job opportunities, that will be a problem. Yes, we have told the government if you want to lower the rents, and maybe some private property owners hope that they can continue with the project at a favorable rate because they're businessmen. They want to make money. But at the end of the day, well, I'm sure there are geniuses in the government who knows how to make ends meet of these projects. But the government thing is, they want to be, they don't want to be impartial. They want to be equal to everyone. I need your help to, pose this question to the government. Yeah, we can talk more in a snack time. We don't want to overrun. Thank you so much, Ms. Sze, for your sharing tonight. We have some more time for interaction. You can discuss more and talk more over pizza and snacks. And our activities come with a cost. If you want to support our cause, you can feel free to donate by putting the money into the box at the back of the room, or you can also scan our QR code or WhatsApp us to donate to us. But before we leave, why don't we take a group photo? Drawing to a close, I'd like you to help us to fill out this questionnaire. Please do scan the QR code and let us know what do you think about our activities, how we can do better. And you can spend 3 minutes here. We cherish, we value your suggestions and comments. When it comes to contents and procedures, how can we do better? We need to hear from you.
喺大家民主。
When you fill out your questionnaire, the day after tomorrow at the same time, 7 p.m. at the same place, we'll have another activity. The talk will be given by Si Cheng. It's also about housing. Remember to register for it.
Right. 我見到大家都知責多難，有埋。
I'm sure you've completed the survey.
我哋今日嘅活動咧，去到呢度真係結束啦。咁大家咧可以喺度食下嘢。
Now, this is so much for our event tonight, and you can continue to have a discussion here.
歡迎大家。
And enjoy the rest of the time. I look forward to seeing you again on Thursday.